And welcome, everyone. Welcome to Episode 3, Coronavirus Continuity Planning. I'm your host, Walt Laskos. Let me just make one little correction here and get rid of that echo that you might have been hearing in the background. Now we're set and ready to go. As I said, welcome to Coronavirus Continuity Planning Episode 3. We have a full staff of, panel of experts ready to share their information with you today. And I'm very, very pleased to have all of them with us. I want to let you know that we are recording this presentation, and that recording will be made available on our coronavirus resource page on the CCOA website. And also, if you have questions for any of the panelists today, we are taking questions. You could please submit those questions by email. Please address your email to communications@ccua.org. That's communications@ccua.org. Before we move forward and I introduce our panel today, let me first call upon Ron McLean, President and CEO of the Cooperative Credit Union Association, for his welcome. Ron.
Well, thank you, Walter. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As I always start off these conference calls or anytime I interact with our membership, I want to, number one, express that we hope you're all safe, healthy, and well. So today is our third episode that Walter mentioned, and our effort as your association to bring relevant and timely information and resources to you. And we have a great lineup of panelists today. So I'm excited for the session, and I encourage our membership to continue to reach out to the association for any assistance going forward. As I like to say, we are in this together, and we will get through this together. So enjoy the session today, and Walter, back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. So let me first introduce who we have with us today on our panel. Joining me from NCUA is John Cutchy. John is the Eastern Region Director for NCUA. We have Chris Gill, Senior Manager, Risk and Compliance Solutions at the CUNA Mutual Group. We also have Rob Sarno, Strategic Account Manager at Agility Recovery. And we are hoping we have Chaz Riznicki, President and CEO of Dover Federal Credit Union in Dover, Delaware. To get us rolling, we're going to start first with John Cutchy, Eastern Region Director for NCUA. We'll call upon John to provide some guidance to us and an update from the agency as it relates to how we're all working and dealing with this pandemic. So John, the microphone is yours.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for taking time out to be part of this. We know very much that credit unions are in a operating mode that 3 or 4 weeks ago they were never expecting to be in, and NCUA operations is basically in the same boat as you are. So before I get started, I want to give you a couple of reference points, things that you can use resource-wise for yourself that the agency is putting out there for credit unions. If you go to our homepage, ncua.gov, right on the homepage there is a link for COVID-19 resources for credit unions. And there's a series of letters to credit unions, interagency guidance pieces, and FAQ and other things where you can find a lot of answers to things. But I'm going to try and make that a little easier for you today and address some of the topics that I think are the most common things that come to us. The other thing I wanted to stress before I get into really my main comments is NCUA's goal here is your safety, your employees' safety, and that of your members. And likewise for our own internal operations, the safety of our employees is driving our decisions with what we do in the near term as we continue to deal with this evolving issue. So you may or may not have heard already that NCUA is in a full off-site posture at this point. So all of our employees, 1,000 plus of us, are all working in a remote teleworking environment right now. We are not authorizing our staff to make any trips to do examinations or supervision contacts at this point. This posture is in place through at least May the 1st. It's being reevaluated as new information comes in every day, but right now we've pushed it out to May 1st at the earliest to begin contacts with credit unions again. And I'm anticipating, this is not NCUA's official position with what I'm about to say. I really would expect that that's actually going to be extended further, but it remains to be seen. What that means for you. So we are still trying to do examinations and off-site contacts. And the examinations are going to be limited just because there's things that we won't be able to do that we would be able to accomplish face-to-face or with files in our hands. So we're asking our examiners to schedule their examinations with the credit union. But if you aren't able, or you have too many other things going on with the COVID actions, and you just tell your examiner, not right now, that's perfectly acceptable and understood, and we will move on to the next credit union. So don't feel in any way compelled if you get a call from your examiner to have to accommodate and take on an exam in this period when you may not have the resources to put into it. But if you are agreeable, we would be doing our procedures off-site. We've already retooled our programs to be able to do a good amount of the review off-site. We also would be developing examination reports, et cetera, doing virtual joint conferences. But again, this is all contingent on whether you are able to do it and agreeable to do it. So I want you to know that you do hold that power in relation to the exam program at this point. So that's sort of our off-site posture, letting you know, I guess we sort of see two waves of potential impact on credit unions as we go forward. Wave one is what we would be experiencing now, which is potential strains on your liquidity. We have been getting reports from around the country that there's a higher level than normal activity in terms of cash withdrawals by members accessing ATMs. But we also, I'm starting to get a sense that that's starting to level off a bit. But liquidity monitoring is one of our main issues at this point. So we're encouraging you, if you're not already doing it, monitoring your cash flow needs, making sure your ATMs stay stocked, make sure you have enough cash on hand to meet lobby demands. Check your contingency funding sources, whatever your backup lines of credit are, just to make sure that that's all still accessible. And if you don't have contingency funding sources, we strongly encourage that you consider getting one or more set up. One of the good things that we've heard, we've been meeting multiple times a week with the corporate credit unions who do most of the back office processing and provide most of the cash services to credit unions. They are flush with cash. They've got a ton of money right now available, which is actually kind of wonderful. Normally in a financial economic situation like this, the corporates would start to feel a liquidity squeeze, but that has not been the case at all. So we feel real good with where funding availability is for credit union operations at this point. So we have that as the short-term issue. The longer-term concern is the longer this situation goes on and people are out of work, unemployment increases, there's forbearance and loan payment programs, and people who are just unable to meet their obligations, credit risk becomes a concern. But to me, that's a longer-term issue. That's something that we would really start to see the effects of 90, 180, 270 days out. So that'll be sort of the tail end of what happens here after we're all back to work and we're out with each other in public again. So in terms of common questions that I get, and I've gotten on several of the meetings that I've done like this. What's the NCUA's position on forbearance programs? If you hadn't already seen it, our chairman did issue a letter to credit unions on that specific topic, dealing with small dollar lending programs in particular. But our position has been credit unions should be doing anything and everything they can to help the membership right now. And sometimes that means taking on some more risk. That's everything from skip-a-pay programs, reduced interest rate programs, waiving fees. Whatever it is you think your credit union can handle, we're encouraging you to do it. And I think you're seeing that kind of around the country in all forms of businesses, but credit unions and the unique structure of it really lend itself to helping their membership in a very unique way. So we do encourage that. In terms of your specific operations, obviously your field of membership and who you serve has a big impact on how COVID-19 is going to impact you. Certain industries are really, you would just assume, are going to be very hard hit. The entertainment industry, the travel industry, some retail outlets are going to feel it in a big way. So we just encourage you, again, be monitoring your activity, your membership. Speak to your examiner as early as possible in the challenges that you do have. One of the things is the Eastern Regional Director that I've instructed our staff and our supervisory staff is to be as helpful to the credit unions as possible during this time period. Think less like an examiner, think less of being critical and more of what can we do to help them, to help you. So that's the mindset that we're in. It's a mindset our chairman would like us to be in. And I think it's the right thing to do at this point in time. We've been hearing stories, particularly small credit unions are going to struggle with a lot of what's going on. You know, you got 1, 2, or 3 people operating a credit union and somebody gets diagnosed with the virus and suddenly everybody's quarantined in the credit union and you don't have staff to keep it open. That's just one example. Or your headquarters in one of your, say, locations and that place is closed down. So now you don't have an office to operate out of. So we've asked our examiners to help facilitate relationships, to help set big credit unions up with smaller credit unions, to maybe provide some staffing services. So please don't hesitate reaching out to your examiner if you need help in any of those areas or any other that I haven't even thought of at this point. One of the common questions that we get, or I've been getting as I've been doing these, is trouble debt restructuring. Is there guidance coming? And the answer to that is yes. There's some interagency guidance that has already been issued, but we're also doing something specific for credit unions out of NCUA, and there'll be some more information coming on that. But I have a couple pieces of information for you. Back on March the 22nd, which was 2 Sundays ago, there was an interagency statement released on TDRs and a couple really important sentences that I want to make sure that you know and you can take some comfort in, that you're not going to be criticized for helping your members. The first sentence says, short-term modifications made on a good faith basis in response to COVID-19 to borrowers who were current prior to any relief are not considered TDRs. Goes on to say the agencies have confirmed with staff of the Financial Accounting Standards Board that short-term modifications made on a good faith basis in response to COVID-19 to borrowers who were current prior to any relief are not TDRs. So that has been confirmed by the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And it also goes on to say that the agency's examiners will exercise judgment in reviewing loan mods, including TDRs, and will not automatically adversely rate risk credits that are affected by COVID-19. And lastly, in terms of reporting these, it says, with regard to loans not otherwise reportable as past due, financial institutions are not expected to designate loans with deferrals granted due to COVID-19 as past due because of the deferral. So there's a lot of latitude in these, making sure that credit unions and other financial institutions are not adversely punished, if you will, in their accounting practices for helping their members. So that was one of the first guidance pieces that did come out. One of the other big questions that we have been getting deals with your annual meetings. A lot of you, this is that time of the season. Springtime is a big time of the year for credit unions to hold their annual meeting. And there was a letter to credit unions that was issued, and again is on the COVID resource site for us, that deals with the specific topic of annual meetings. And one of the great things about the letter is right in the body of a letter is a bylaw amendment that the board can simply adopt by vote, which allows you to hold your annual meeting virtually. There's a couple things in the actual bylaw amendment that talks about 7 days notification and having some systems in place to do it, but you have the ability to adopt that amendment and hold your annual meeting virtually. The other option you have is just to delay it to later in this year, but again, if you want to stay on schedule and you've got vacancies on your board, people who are looking to get off of the board, etc., and you want to hold it now, you have another option that allows you to respect the social distancing requirements out there. And I guess the last thing I have in my comments is related to an information gathering that we have started at NCUA. So we sent out a letter to the state supervisory authorities in each state and notified our field staff at NCUA that by the end of this week, we're asking that each credit union get a phone call either from their NCUA examiner or their state examiner. And it's a form that has a series of questions in it. Most of them are yes, no, so it's not going to really require research by you. It'll be mainly a Q&A format, and it hits really a couple of key topics. Several questions about your current operating status. Are you open? Are you closed? Are you partially open? Have you shut down some branches, limited hours? So that's one handful of questions. And the other is in relation to liquidity. Are you seeing increases in cash requests? Have you had to access your lines of credit? What are your sources of lines of credit? So it really hits those two main topics. And that's something that should occur this week, and you should expect a call from your examiner before the end of this week, trying to get that. And once we have that, it'll help us project what we need to do in the next round of questions. So I would expect a second round 2 to 3 weeks down the road after we finish this information collection. And it could get a little more specific in some areas, depending on what stressors we see emerging within the credit union system. So on that, I will turn back to our host and await questions as you see fit.
Thank you, John. And this is Ron McQueen from CCUA. And I want to say a personal thank you to John Cutchy and his team at NCUA. From the outset, they have been incredibly responsive and helpful to CCUA on anything we've asked for. So a tremendous support from John and the team. So thank you. John, a quick question or two. Can you remind the people or the on the phone and our membership about what they are asked to share with NCUA in terms of, if they close a branch or postpone an annual meeting or any kind of liquidity concerns? Maybe remind them what they are asked to share with their examiner or NCUA throughout the crisis.
Sure. Well, in terms of things that are operationally related, like liquidity needs, or you need help with your branches and things, I would just encourage an open dialogue with your examiner, who's not there to criticize you. They're there to help you find an answer. But in terms of you actually closing branches, that's addressed a bit in the FAQ to one of the letters that we've issued. And basically, if you're closing a branch that is going to be closed for longer than 5 days, I believe it is, you're technically supposed to notify NCUA of that closure, but there's also an additional level of clearance in order for you to need to notify us, and that if it's a significant disruption to your operation or loss of vital services, I believe is the actual words that are used. And I would submit in 98% of a branch closure or reduced operation perspective, it's not going to hit that threshold that you're not going to be able to deliver vital services. So I would think that in the majority of cases, formal notification of us is not required.
Thank you. Another question, John. So at some point, you'll get back into the exam process, being more hands-on and on-site. And your comments earlier about being less of an examiner right now, more of a helpful resource. So when the credit union does have their exam down the road, NCUA will take into consideration potentially higher delinquency and lower earnings that were caused by COVID-19 into consideration, and won't penalize the credit union for all their efforts to provide relief to their members. So I just want to make sure that's put out there and conveyed to NCUA.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Ron. I'll give you an example of what I think we've done in a positive way, at least since I've been RD, and when I look at how we've handled some of the cases related to the taxi medallions. That's another example where management's not going to be penalized for something they couldn't see coming. And obviously COVID-19 and a worldwide pandemic would fit that category as well. Now we're going to do everything we can to help, if a credit union is really in dire financial situation, we have ways to help a credit union survive that with what we call 208 assistance. We have the ability to inject capital into a failing credit union, place deposits in there, and several other things that we can do as tools to help resolve a credit union situation. And the majority of the times when we get into that, it's largely a failure on the part of management to have properly run their institution. But in this case with COVID-19, again, no one saw a worldwide pandemic coming and us being in the situation we're in. So credit unions are not going to be looked poorly upon for struggling financially during this time period, and we're going to do everything we can to help a credit union survive.
Thank you, John. So thanks, John, for your comments and answering a few questions. And Walter, I think it's time now to move on to our next panelist.
That's right, Ron. Thank you. Thank you, John. Now let's go over to Chris Gill, Senior Manager, Risk and Compliance Solutions at the CUNA Mutual Group. Chris is down in Maryland enjoying probably a little bit of a warmer weather than we are up here in New England. But Chris, good to have you aboard, and good to have you sharing some guidance from the CUNA Mutual Group. It's all yours.
Thank you, Walt. Can you hear me okay?
Sound great.
Great. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to join the call. It's a little warmer here in Maryland, probably than in New England, but probably not too much. I must admit we did have some 70-degree weather earlier in the week, but it's cooled back off. So coming back down to reality for the meantime. Did want to also thank each of the credit unions out there. I know they're tirelessly serving our members in this time of uncertainty, and it's truly, like John, I've also been on a couple of these calls over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and it's truly remarkable to see just so many people and organizations coming together for this common goal of taking care of each other. So just really impressive and nice to be a part of it. Here at CUNA Mutual Group, we're obviously fielding quite a few questions, especially in our risk and compliance group, from our credit union customers related to this terrible virus and how we can make adjustments to better serve our members while still keeping our team members safe. So I thought I would just share some of those key learnings that we're having, as well as some of the recommendations that we're providing to our credit unions. So with many credit unions moving towards an increasingly larger remote workforce, I think first we must recognize that there are going to be some inherent cyber threats associated with telework that we should be prepared for. And while I get it, every credit union's network architecture is different. Everybody's existing controls are different. There's still some basic principles that we can practice that I think make sense for all credit unions to be able to improve their overall cyber hygiene. And so first, we should be ensuring that credit unions, wherever possible, are only accessing the network from credit union-issued computers or laptops. We should also be monitoring those devices and making sure that they're properly patched and updated with antivirus software. And I know it seems very remedial, but these are very real concerns and questions that we're receiving. And also that they're only used for business purposes. So we got to remember that we now have people remoting into the network that previously were not experienced with telework. So we also want to make sure that we consider their Wi-Fi connection. So we want to train them on how to properly secure their Wi-Fi connection. They should never be accessing the network from an unsecure connection. Whenever possible, we want to use a VPN, a virtual private network, or a virtual desktop. We also want to enforce tokenization, one-time passwords. So what we're doing here is we're making sure that we have a protected device. We're making sure that we have a secured network, and now through a more secure authentication process, we're ensuring that it's the right person connecting to the network. It's also important to revisit or emphasize safe email practices. So that would be the use of encryption when transmitting data, for example, data loss prevention tools, but also just simply being suspicious of any emails that might contain links or attachments. So train. Education is key. Unfortunately, our people are oftentimes our weakest links. So phishing campaigns are a good idea if we're not doing them already. And in a pinch, while we don't recommend it, we do recognize that there are times when we may have employees using personal devices or mobile devices for telecommuting purposes. I would just encourage you to have your IT department, identify and establish some minimum standards of security for these devices. And lastly, I would just point out that in these situations where we have more people telecommuting, internet congestion is going to be an issue as well. So just be prepared to kind of navigate that potentially diminished service level commitment. So that's the teleworking piece. For those of you that still have open branches, which most of you, all of you do, we want to revisit the importance of good workplace hygiene. I know especially in this area, in the Washington, D.C. region, we are seeing an explosion of positive tests, and most of that has to do with the test kits being more readily available. So it may seem like a given at this point, but we want to constantly remind our team members to do the little things they can do to protect themselves, not touching their face, covering their mouth, when coughing, washing their hands, sanitizing their workstation regularly, emptying waste baskets, all those little things, and probably, most importantly, staying home if they're sick. So making sure that everybody understands the established credit union procedures around sick days and how to notify the credit union. The other consideration for branches is that we recognize most of you are operating with a reduced workforce. So safety and security is of utmost concern. And because we have that smaller workforce, this makes it exponentially more important that we're practicing sound opening and closing procedures. So the bad guys are still working. They're not following the social distancing guidelines. They're still out there looking for opportunities to exploit our credit unions. So we really need to encourage our team members to maintain that heightened sense of awareness, especially when entering and exiting the building. So using those teams of 2 whenever possible. And really a good time to just revisit all of your security procedures and make sure that all of your team members are aware of the existing security procedures and policies. To add to the conversation around, branch closings from a security perspective, if you're temporarily closing a branch location and you don't have a specific safety plan that addresses pandemics or infectious disease events, we would encourage you to follow your business resiliency approach for closing those locations. So that would include things like depleting cash on hand, of course, following appropriate cash transportation, storage guidelines, vault specification guidelines, communicating the change in office hours and offering alternate locations through signage or your website or social media. And of course, in the event that members can't conduct business at another branch, considering that option to have members calling in to schedule an on-site lobby appointment. I also wanted to quickly touch on another question we've received regularly, and that's about bringing children into the credit union. So many of you may have team members with children that are like mine, home from school, doing distance learning and without a daycare provider. So many of your team members may not have other options outside of bringing the child into work. So just wanted to highlight, among other things, this really can pose additional risk for infection to employees, to the child, along with generating additional employment, safety, and legal issues. So not to mention, obviously, liability, job performance or productivity of other employees. We also want to think about discriminatory claims if we're only allowing certain people to bring their children into the office, reputational damage, of course, and even the impact to your insurance policy. So I would encourage you to reach out to your CUNA Mutual Group or other account team to discuss program risks, including any potential exclusions to insurance coverage before allowing this. Also, you want to make sure that you're discussing with legal counsel so that you can cover any state or local health-related laws. And like with any major policy change or exception, we always encourage you to seek board approval. And in that board-approved policy or set of procedures, I would expect that you would want to consider things like employee eligibility, the age of the child, what location or space in the credit union are they allowed to enter, proper disposal of diapers, breastfeeding areas, baby-free zones, emergency procedures, length of time that the child might be allowed at work. So all of these things are really important to consider. So it's just really important that we're very deliberate with this approach so that we can make sure that we're covering all angles. So I think one other thing that I want to make sure that I do point out, we have a lot of existing resources out there. So if you're not already receiving our risk alerts, I would encourage you to sign up for the risk alerts. No additional charge to access the Protection Resource Center. So we've got several FAQs, links to external resources as well that are available. And we also, on the April 14th and April 15th, will have 3 additional risk consultants that are experts in 3 different areas. So one from lending, one from transactions, and one from operations. And we'll be hosting another webinar on the 14th and the 15th. So I think in times like this, communication is key. And so we're doing everything we can to try to bring you as much information as we possibly can. So with that, I can either pass the mic to the next speaker or entertain any questions.
Well, Chris,
Chris,
thing.
this is Ron McLean.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ron.
Walter, you want to go ahead? Yeah. Thanks, Walter. So, Chris, just a quick question. Have you gotten know about, is there increased attempts by criminals to use more of the email scams where it's, asking a member to share their PIN, their account information, things of that nature? Has there been an uptick in that aspect of cybercrime, do you know?
Absolutely. So great question. Yeah, we've already seen many coronavirus-themed phishing attacks. So those are those banking Trojans that you mentioned, or those attempts to steal login credentials. So many of those have included information appearing to come from either the CDC or the World Health Organization. Others are disguised as like local health or law enforcement officials, or we've even seen some that have reported to be from local Board of Education. So people thinking they're getting information about what's the next steps in their distance learning for their child. So absolutely, we've seen an increase there, and we would expect that will continue. We've also seen reports of multiple scams in response to the federal stimulus package. So emails that appear to include information about how to claim or receive your stimulus check from the federal government. And we've seen these not only in emails, but also in text and social media posts. And I've even heard some reports of some phone call attempts. They're all pretty similar. What they're trying to do is get personally identifiable information from our members. We're also seeing a lot of these scams are targeting our seniors, and this isn't anything new, but maybe a good opportunity to re-educate our elderly members. And finally, with regard to scams, and this is something we're just starting to kind of scratch the surface, but as we're seeing increased card not present transactions and inquiries related to contactless payments, so there's additional transactions are going to create opportunities for additional fraud. So we're also encouraging credit unions to go back and revisit their card limits, look at the controls that they have in place for things like contactless payments or funds transfer, and just make sure that they have the controls set in a way that it kind of balances the member service and increased demand needs with sound risk management practices.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris, before I let you go, one question is where can listeners go for more information? You mentioned about upcoming webinars that CUNA Mutual Group will be hosting.
Yes, so if you have your log in to your CUNA Mutual Group Credit Union Protection Resource Center, and all of the login, I believe the April 14th webinar has already reached maximum. We use WebEx, and I think there's 1,000 registrant limit. So the April 14th, I believe, is already capped off. So now we're looking at April 15th. It'll be the same presenters at both. But yep, log in through the Protection Resource Center. Also on the Resource Center, make sure you're signing up for the risk alerts. I think we've already sent out 4 risk alerts on COVID-19 and working on the 5th. So again, trying to do our part and staying in front of this and keeping our credit unions educated. If anybody's having any issues with getting signed up, certainly reach out to me or any other CUNA Mutual Group representative. I can make my information available, Walt.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. Now let's move on to Rob Sarno. Rob is a strategic account manager with Agility Recovery. And much of what we've heard Chris touching on relative to safety and soundness and maintaining compliance and looking at your operations, that everything is set up the way it's supposed to be. I'm sure Rob is in a position to echo a lot of that, to provide guidance on. And I'm sure, Rob, you have heard a lot thus far since the last time we talked, March 11th, of folks that are now working from home, how they're coping with that kind of a connection back to the main office. I mean, and all the infrastructure that goes around the continuity planning. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say that you've heard over the last couple of weeks. Rob, it's yours.
All right. Thank you, Walter. I appreciate being here once again. And it's great to hear everybody being human about everything. There's really nothing more that we can do but be human in these situations, and I'm glad to hear that. So some of the things I might be echoing some of the items that Chris just went over, some really great information. But some of the trends that we're seeing now with credit unions are doing a wonderful job, our customers, of keeping their employees and their staff, their members safe during this pandemic by closing branches to regular business and having in-person business by appointment only if necessary, utilizing drive-up and walk-up window services, extending or limiting those hours depending on where they are, putting remote services first and helping customers become familiar with those remote services, offering secure email for customers, online applications for lending, loans, mortgages, and credit cards, and reassuring customers that their money is safe and secure and insured. Utilizing website alerts and banners to make customers aware of their branch status, and sending out useful health information tips to customers via email, websites, and social media. And they've all rearranged their workforce and adjusting, putting more resources towards customer service and IT staffing, and holding internal virtual meetings. And all the credit union customers are dealing with the challenges that Chris went over, the equipment, not having enough equipment. We had a huge run on laptops here. Everything happened very fast in the last few weeks, and laptops became a huge commodity. Telecommuting and the IT challenges that those bring up, but businesses in general are realizing that ever before that the importance of their business continuity planning as a way of mitigating potential impacts of this worldwide health emergency, focused on realigning their plans to adjust to the new way of business sustainability. And as we probably deal with these unique challenges that arise with this pandemic, we're recommending that credit unions have preventative programs in place. This will help reduce the impact of your institution's operations being further significantly affected by the pandemic. These programs should include monitoring outbreaks in your area, educating employees, contacting and coordinating with service providers and suppliers. Document a strategy now that provides for scaling your institution's pandemic efforts, consistent with the upcoming stages of the pandemic itself, starting with the first cases in your organization. This strategy will need to outline plans to recover from a wave of pandemic cases, allowing proper preparation for the following waves. Have a comprehensive framework in place for facilities operation procedures that provide your organization with means to continue critical operations in the event that potential large numbers of your critical staff become unavailable for indefinite periods. And consider the further impact of customer reactions, the demand and increased reliance on online banking, telephone banking, ATMs, and call-in support services. Giving consideration to further actions by public health and government authorities that affect critical business functions for your financial institution. A good preventative program needs to be tested, so you want to test your program. If possible, at this point, make sure your pandemic planning practices and capabilities are effective and allow for critical operations to continue. And incorporate an oversight program. This will ensure ongoing review and up-to-date of your pandemic plan, so policies, solutions, standards, and procedures are included to up-to-date information that's relevant and provided by governmental sources or institutions monitoring program. That's a lot of what we're recommending right now. And I'll open up to any questions or anything.
Hey, Rob, let me ask this. I think when you're looking at in cases where, I think we have a credit union that all of a sudden is faced with the challenges that are going on where you may have to have some people working from home, the whole bit. How careful do we need to be when you start thinking about a lot of folks now are working from home? They may be communicating over their own Wi-Fi system or their own internet system. Is that system now becoming a target for, let's say, folks to be able to, or for those of ill intent to be able to tap into?
Those are definitely becoming a target. At Agility, we don't necessarily hear too much about the home networks. We hear more about what equipment they need for those home telecommuting workforces. But of course, recommendations to have using secure email, maybe your learning management system. If you have a social engineering training that you can send out to your employees, to reminding them to be mindful while they go about their work, and making sure having your IT company or making sure that the home networks are safe and that there's cybersecurity in place. any type of firewalls or VPN or anything that needs to be in place, that they have those proper resources for their homework.
Yeah, and I would definitely think of like when you start looking at the laptops that employees use. Obviously, I would imagine that the IT teams that are working with them are definitely staying on top of, I guess I should say, the type of protective services and software that's on those laptops to make sure that they are safe.
Certainly, and trying to stay ahead of the curve of what's going on out there, just by keeping it open eyes and ears, so to speak.
And Chris, are you hearing from the standpoint of the dealings that you have with your members with members, I should say, through the CUNA Mutual Group? Are you finding something similar to the standpoint of some of the challenges that maybe smaller shops are facing given the current scenario?
Regarding the cyber aspect of teleworking, or just in general, new remote team members?
Well, I would say primarily from the cyber aspect when you think about it.
Yeah. So the biggest thing we're hearing is that limited access to credit union issued devices. So especially the smaller shops may have not had multiple laptops or tablets to provide team members that are now conducting transactions like accounting functions or payments processing, all of those non-member facing activities that are still critical aspects of the credit union. And we have a lot of secure data that passes through those devices. So that's the biggest concern we've had is, hey, we recognize the importance of data protection and good cyber hygiene, but we do not have enough devices to go around. And so I kind of touched on it briefly, but we recognize that that's just the reality. And so credit unions are making exceptions to their telework policies that they typically under non-pandemic situations would not make. And so again, just really encouraging credit unions to seek the advice of their IT specialists. If they don't have for the smaller credit unions, if there's not a designated network security specialist, reach out to your outside sources, CUNA Mutual Group, or any other consulting firms that you have available. I'm sure would be happy to kind of walk through what those minimum standards are. But there are ways to take those bring your own device laptops or mobile devices and get them up to speed in terms of proper security. Critically important. We recognize we're making those exceptions, but we've got to make sure that we have basic security standards in place on those devices.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because I also want to underscore, and I know Ron would agree with me that if there are any members listening and they're really finding it challenging in terms of the infrastructure or their IT issues that might be related to it, certainly reach out to CCUA, reach out to us at your league. That's what we're here for, and we could at least put you in touch with the proper folks or whoever it might be that can really assist. And I think we need to really emphasize that's important. One thing I wanted to comment on as well, and I know, Ron, you talked about it during your comments, and perhaps I might, share this from a standpoint of when you talk about testing your backup systems or testing your systems because of your continuity and being able to maintain continuity. When we are in some respects, or in many respects perhaps, in a continuity scenario as we are now, where you have the day-to-day services certainly are not routine. Is there or are there still ways that one can test some of your continuity systems that make up the entire plan to ensure that they are operational and fully functional? Let me throw that out to Rob and Chris and John, if you want to chime in on that one as well too. I think that's important. Do I have any takers?
So this is Chris. I'll jump in. In terms of testing, I would actually say we're in live, go live situations right now. So I haven't heard of credit unions doing a whole lot of testing of their pandemic plans at this point. What I have had a lot of conversations with credit unions about is, hey, we didn't realize we weren't as prepared as we thought we were. And so what I would say to that is that's okay, because all of us are coming to that same realization that we are not as prepared as we thought we were. So I think a lot of credit unions are just kind of in scramble mode right now. I agree with you all. It's important if we have devices or connectivity options or channels that haven't been tested and we have opportunities to do that. It certainly can't hurt. But I think most important right now is documenting the deficiencies. It's okay. We don't need to sweep them under the rug. We need to recognize them, remediate them, and make sure that we're learning from them for use in future situations.
Yeah, this is John with NCUA. I mean, obviously the situation, contingency planning, continuity of operations. I don't know that many places in any business line really had this one coming. So we know from our perspective at NCUA, there just hasn't been time to go through a normal testing and vetting process. And unfortunately, that makes us as an industry more vulnerable to bad actors. We know they're still out there and they're still going after IT systems. And now with some of the connectivity that you see and the need for credit unions to go remote and employees to go remote who they never expected to be in that status, it does make them more vulnerable. But in pandemic testing in general, I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned when we come out of this. And again, not just for credit unions, for NCUA, for state agencies and everyone else, to really make sure that we have a more of a pandemic plan in place. But again, that's after this is over.
John, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Rob.
Yes, I was just going to just echo that. Basically, nobody really saw this coming. We prepare for regional events, we prepare for isolated events, but this is everywhere. And I think it really took a lot of organizations by surprise. I think one of the most important things now is documenting what the deficiencies are, just as Chris was saying, and educating your employees, making sure they're educated to what they need to know, to what's going on, and making sure that everything's being set up for future episodes such as this, because they're talking about this going away for the summer and possibly coming back in the fall even stronger. So there may be a second chance to have everything in place. But I think that the education of your employees is probably one of the biggest things to implement right now and make sure that's going on.
And I used to work for a corporate credit union on the West Coast, which by name I won't touch on. However, one thing that really occurred during my tenure there was, of course, with earthquakes in California. It was drilled into us, and we had testing like crazy for business continuity. So that's why I come from a framework of the importance of having a good continuity plan to test the systems over and over. And basically, you all hit it right on the mark when you say, well, we're going through, and all credit unions may be in different, let's say, ways of experiencing what's going on now relative to their business operations. Documenting everything right now is of the utmost importance, because now you'll be able to identify what may not be working as well as you thought it should and what's working very well. So therefore, when we get back to normalcy, let's knock on wood that we get there very soon. Once that happens, then we could go back in and look at the operations and go after those little points that may not be as strong as we thought they are and improve them. And that's the best way, to really test and improve your business continuity plans across the board. So I think everybody hit it straight up. We're coming up on about maybe 5 minutes left in our program. Unfortunately, Chaz Wisnicki, obviously as a CEO, you can imagine, what CEOs have to deal with. Members come first. and he's not able to join us in our program today. So we're wishing Chaz well and hope that all is good down at Dover Federal Credit Union. But at this point, let me go back and ask our panelists for closing remarks. Like I say, we have about 5 minutes left. And maybe, John, we could start with you and provide some closing comments for everyone before we sign off. John?
Yeah, I do appreciate it. I just want to let everybody know that we are here to help you, and I know that sounds weird. We're a federal agency who normally examines you, but I do want to offer us as a resource to help you bounce things off of, get the knowledge you need. Can't emphasize enough that your safety, your employees' safety, your member safety is our primary concern, and hopefully all the things you see coming out from us echo that and reflect that in the direction that we're giving to our institutions at this point.
All righty. Thank you, John. Chris?
Sure. So 2 points. One, I meant to mention this in the earlier conversation around security, but this has come up a lot, so I just wanted to mention we had a lot of questions around the currency. As John mentioned, credit unions kind of concerned about a run on currency and so the coverage aspect of that. I just want to quickly mention that we did raise everybody's on-premise total coverage limit by $500,000 and no action needed on the part of the credit union and no additional premium. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. That will automatically expire on May 18th. Back to the remote team members, because that seems to be the big concern for most, and especially the credit unions that aren't experienced with telework and given all the external distractions generated by the coronavirus. I really just encourage everybody to be patient during this transition, accept the fact that we may not currently be as productive as we were prior to the outbreak. Yes, we need to take care of our members, but we also have to take care of our teams as well. So over communicate, find reasons to check in with your remote teams and remind them that their health and the health of their families is priority. If you have any employee assistance programs or outside resources that are available to your teams, make sure that you reinforce with them how to access those materials. Maybe even consider some sort of virtual team building activities. Your employees' mental health is just as important as their physical health. Stress, anxiety, decreased morale, these are all common during a pandemic. So acknowledge that with your team and make sure to communicate with them that you are available to help them navigate these uncertain and truly just very scary times.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Let's go over to Rob Sarno, for our closing remarks. Rob?
Sure, certainly. So, and I hope I'm just not echoing what everybody else says, but the safety and health of your employees and your members really it comes first in these situations, and making sure that you have healthcare services available to your employees, making sure that employees know about these different programs that are involved, what they need, keeping them engaged, as Chris was just saying, maybe just doing some type of virtual game. I heard a credit union customer of ours they had a team meeting where they did a trivia challenge to start off their morning before work started with a virtual trivia challenge. So really being innovative and finding out new ways of doing business and being safe and utilizing what we have at our fingertips at this time. So it's important.
All righty. I really want to thank John Cutchy from NCUA, Chris Gill from CUNA Mutual Group, and Rob Sarno from Agility Recovery for being on our panel today. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we are recording today's program, and that recording will be made available to members on our CCUA website on the coronavirus page, resources page. And before we say goodbye, let me ask Ron McLean, our president and CEO, for his comments. Ron.
Yeah, well, thank you, Walter, and thanks for Walter for pulling this together today. As always, again, I want to say I wish everyone stays healthy and well on your end. I want to say a big thank you to John, Chris, and Rob, not only for yourself personally, but for your broader organizations, all you're doing to assist the credit union movement at this time. And for our membership, continue to look to the association for assistance. We are proud to serve you. And again, we'll get through this together. Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for joining us today for episode 3 of the Coronavirus Continuity Planning series. Reminder, tomorrow, April 2nd at 11 a.m., we have episode 4. We are featuring tomorrow Dr. Linda McKenna-Gullin, Professor of Psychology at Marymount University, Mark Adams, Director of HR Services at the Employers Association of the Northeast, Sean Daly, President CEO of People's Credit Union, and Blanche Jackson, President CEO of Stepping Stones Community Federal Credit Union. So we have a good program put together for you tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. We hope you could join us there. Registrations on the CCUA website. This is Walt Lascos. Thank you for joining us, and that concludes our program.